Okay, welcome to video 6, the final video of chapter 2. We just have a few slides in this last video. And what I wanted to start with was this overview and historical context of theories and point out a couple of things I want you to look at and read in the chapter. First of all, there's a nice overview of all the theories that were covered in the earlier videos. There's a chart on page 57, and for each of the theories, it talks about whether it's leaning more towards quantitative development or continuous development, or does it lean more towards qualitative, stage-like development. So you can see that for each of the theories. And also there's a column that looks at, nature versus nurture. Is the theory more biological, which is, our nature, or is it more based on environmental forces, which is nurture? So you can see, you should take a look at that chart and kind of get a sense of where each theory falls along those two questions that we kind of started this chapter with, nature versus nurture and continuous versus stage-like development. So that's page 57. And secondly, there's a section called the historical context of theories, pages 58 to 59. So it's just 2 pages. Make sure you read it. It's interesting. It points out how some of the theories developed. Obviously theories don't just develop in a vacuum, but each theory kind of draws upon earlier ideas and concepts. So it kind of looks at the historical progression of some of the theories we went over, and why they were formulated when they were, and also how the historical and the social context affects how these theories were formed, like what was happening at that time when the researcher came up with the theory, and what was culture like at that time, what kind of historical differences caused these theories to arise. And just to give you a quick example of that, there's a reason, it's been pointed out that there's a good reason why Freud had a lot of sexual ideas in his theory. He was in the Victorian age where sexuality was really repressed. It wasn't talked about. You weren't supposed to think about sex. And so he was at a time where a lot of people probably had sexually buried in their unconscious because they didn't, especially women at the time, because it was wrong for them to ever talk about it, and they weren't even supposed to think about it. So they probably, any kind of sexual urges they might have had, they probably repressed them and pushed them into their unconscious. And so he apparently, came across a lot of patients that had sexuality kind of buried in their unconscious minds, and that was affecting their behavior. So that theory wouldn't have arisen now in today's society, but at that time it was sexuality, the thinking of sexuality or the talking about sexuality was so taboo that it caused problems in people's unconscious minds. Okay, anyways, that's the kind of thing that they look at there. Make sure you do read that section 58 and 59. Okay, let's go on. Just a couple more slides. The last 2 slides are going to look at the impact of biology and culture on theory and research in child development. So let's begin with biology. And a couple of areas of study look at how biology impacts development. One is neuropsychology, and this looks at the interaction between the brain and behavior. So, what areas of the brain cause what kinds of behaviors, and what kind of differences might one individual have in their brain to lead to different types of behaviors in another individual. So it's just connecting the actual structure in the areas of the brain with behavior, with what behavior results from it. Then we have behavioral genetics or genomics. This is the study of the interaction of genes and behavior. So how do various genes affect a person's behavior? By the way, the two terms there, there's just a slight difference. The word genetics, behavioral genetics typically looks at individual genes. So if a person has form A15ZX of this gene, then they're more likely to be aggressive, or things like that. So it studies like individual genes and what they do and how they affect behavior. Genomics, the word genome means the complete set of genes. So it's how your complete set of genes, affects your behavior. All the genes that make up an organism. So it's not looking specifically at individual genes, but the whole gene collection. Okay. Anyways, we actually will talk more about behavioral genetics in another chapter. And so that was kind of mixing biology with behavior, and how our brain and how our genes affect our behavior. This last slide is about culture, and it's pointing out that we should keep in mind that these theories that we looked at were all developed in the Western world. Indigenous, sorry, I have so much trouble with that word for something. Indigenous theories reflect the realities of different environments. So theories that are developed in very different cultures than Western society would look and sound very differently than the theories we went over. I mean, some cultures, the theories might involve theories about psychology might involve, I don't know, ghosts or spirits, or ancestors that talk to you when you through your mind or something like that. I mean, they can be very, very different. Keep in mind also, we talked about the distinction between individualistic versus collectivist cultures, and developmental theories from non-Western collectivist cultures tend to focus on the role of the individual in the context of the social group, as you would expect. I mean, that's what collectivist culture values. So in our culture, we study individuals and how they change and develop. And in a collectivist culture, they kind of study how individuals, how they perform within social groups, and how they social, they concentrate much more on how the members of a group affect one another and things like that. So very kind of different, just a different slant. We really study individuals in psychology much more than collectivist cultures, and they study groups. Okay, and that'll do it for chapter 2.